welcome to another episode of Streetwise English Podcast, where we have interviews and conversations with our American friends. Today we have a special guest known as Dagwood Streets on YouTube and the owner of the Electric Scooter Podcast. He's got some crazy stories, and today he's going to be talking about something that happened in Memphis, Tennessee in the 1970s. The city was on fire, and the firemen were starting the fires. Put on your seatbelts and join us for this ride.
To take you back in time, the year was 1976 when I joined the Navy. And I joined the Navy as a basic designation just called airman, which means you have no job. You're just going to be working in the aviation field somehow. Later on, I was sent to an aircraft carrier after boot camp. And on the aircraft carrier, I wanted to be a weather guesser. It's an aerographer's mate, which is a weatherman, which we colloquially called weather guesser. But it's an AG, aerographer's mate. And they said, we don't need aerographer's mate. We need air traffic controllers. And I had what was called an ASVAB score. I don't know what it stands for, ASVAB. It's aptitude something battery, ASVAB, that qualified me for the higher demand jobs, such as air traffic control. And they needed an air traffic controller. So I went into the division on the aircraft carrier that has air traffic controllers. It's called CATC, Carrier Air Traffic Control Center. I'm sorry this story has a bunch of acronyms in the beginning.
No, that's okay. Can you give us a big picture? Sorry to interrupt, but can you give us a big picture, like about how many guys are on an aircraft carrier? Because some people don't know how big. It's basically like a floating city, right?
Yes, at the time it was approximately 5,000.
Wow, on one boat.
Living on this floating city. And if I wanted to tell you all about the aircraft carrier, the 3 years I spent on there, this would be a really long story. But since we're talking about the 1978 riots in Memphis, Tennessee, the background is I had to pass a test called CTO, Control Tower Operator. And in the history of the Navy, nobody had ever passed this test on an aircraft carrier without having gone to the actual school first. But my division officer, who was a Mustang means they were former enlisted, and then they became an officer. He was a Mustang officer. And he told me if I can pass the CTO, he will spend the money to send me to the school in Memphis. So our aircraft carrier was home ported in San Diego, California, on an island called Coronado. That's the same island where welcome to the Hotel California, that Hotel del Coronado, that's on Coronado Island. That's where my aircraft carrier was home ported. He didn't think I would pass it, but we had an air traffic controller on board who was super smart. And he didn't teach me the answers or anything, but he motivated me to study. He's saying, get in there at night when other people are out drinking and partying or going home to their families or doing whatever they're doing. You're going to sit here and study. And I did, and I passed it. So I was the first person in the history of United States Navy to pass Control Tower Operator, my CTO, without having had the school first. Because people go to school and then they have to pass the test. And even that's tricky. So then he had to live up to his promise. So they got the funds, they got the money, and they sent me at the age of, I think I was 18 years old, sent me to Memphis, Tennessee to air traffic control school. Well, back then we didn't have the internet and we didn't have a lot of the communications and social networking and all the different things that we have today, the tools we have to stay on top of the news, podcasts like yours. So while I was on the airplane in the air, what people didn't know was how extreme the situation was on the ground in Memphis, Tennessee. And the situation was that first, the fire department went on strike. They wanted more money and they wanted better benefits, so they went on strike. And the police, in solidarity with the firemen, went on strike. You can look this up. It's all on the internet, and I don't know all the details, but here's what happened to me, and here's what it meant to me. The firemen were not getting the deal they wanted, so check this out. The firemen, the people paid to put out fires, were starting fires.
Oh, man.
Because they wanted the bosses and the people who write their paychecks to understand how important they are to the community. So they were setting fires, and the fires were just burning. And there was no police. So the situation of Memphis being on fire and having no police created a very chaotic situation. Then, at the age of 18...
No, I was just saying that. So this was your first assignment or station, and they're sending you to this burning city.
Exactly. They didn't know the extent of how bad it was. You know, they're sitting on a ship. Are they watching the nightly news, and the nightly news maybe mentions it in passing? They didn't connect the dots that we're sending this 18-year-old kid to a city that's on fire and on strike. And then how far is the school from the airport? They didn't put all those things together. They didn't connect the dots. So I landed, here I am, 18 years old, with a short haircut, a sea bag on my back. That's what we carried all of our worldly possessions in. And I land at the airport. So I call the base, which was in Millington, Tennessee, and I say, here I am, send a driver, come and pick me up. And they say, well, we can't do that because there's a curfew. It's too dangerous. I said, well, I have to get there to Millington, Tennessee somehow from the airport. Then they said, well, try and find your way the best way you can. So I was in a strange city, and I didn't know where to go. I just started walking. I didn't even know how far away it was. I think I don't know. I actually don't know, but I think, let's say 20 miles, something like that. So I'm walking down the street, and there's fires, and there's chaos, and there's no police, and I'm walking through bad neighborhoods, and I run into this guy who's also walking. And he is from a town nearby Millington called Fraser. And I started talking to him, and I told him I'm trying to find my way. He goes, well, I'm going that direction anyway. And as we're talking, he reveals to me that he was on furlough from prison for good behavior, but he had taken part in a murder. I don't know if he actually murdered the person or he was with somebody who murdered somebody, but he just said he was in prison for murder, and he had 2 weeks furlough. And he said, by the way, I'll help you get in the right direction, but I just want to let you know that as soon as they let me out of prison, I had a microdot of LSD, which on the street they just called acid. He said, so it's going to kick in pretty soon. I don't know, half an hour, but I'm going to be pretty wasted. He said, so just follow me, because he was going to be having hallucinations and all that kind of stuff, full on. And he said, just stick with me, just follow me, I'll get you in the right direction. So we start walking, and he starts hallucinating. And he's saying words that are very politically incorrect. We're in a predominantly African-American part of town, and there are groups of 7, 8, 10, 12 people standing on the corner drinking beer, smoking marijuana, and here come a couple white guys, getting sideways glances. What are these guys doing in this neighborhood? We don't see a lot of white young men walking through this dangerous part of this dangerous neighborhood. And he starts hiding in bushes. So I got to stand there and wait, and I got to coax him out, say, come on out from behind the bush, please. Let's continue walking. And he would say crazy stuff, and he'd run into someone's backyard for a minute. And again, here I am in a strange state that I've never been to, a strange city that is on fire and under curfew, and I'm walking with a murderer who is on acid, trying to get to the Navy base so that I can get my training for air traffic control school. To make a long story short, we're walking down the road, and this sounds like it's out of a movie or something, but this was the 70s. This was 1978. It was July of 1978. And we stick out our thumb, and a pink Cadillac, a big, long pink Cadillac, pulls over to the side of the road. And in it is an African-American guy with a big white Panama hat, platform shoes, these huge bell-bottom pants. And he's smoking what looks like a really skinny marijuana cigarette, really, really skinny. And he offers it to me. I'm like, no, thanks. Of course, the guy gets in the back seat. The murderer on acid gets in the back seat, and he hands it to him, and he takes a big hit off of it. And he asks the guy, what is this? And he says, well, it's mint leaf that's been sprayed with elephant tranquilizer. Later on, I found out that's what they called PCP. So that's a really heavy, heavy drug, too. So I said, no, thank you. I'm in the Navy, and I'm going to a school. I'm not going to take drugs. I'm already a little bit on edge because I'm in an area that I've never been to, and things are pretty dangerous in this area where we are. And as we're talking,
I was just going to say, so welcome to Memphis. You're smoking angel.
Yeah.
Your friend is smoking angel dust, who's a murderer, in the back of a pink Cadillac with probably a pimp, right?
Exactly. Well, I don't know if the guy was a pimp, but he was certainly dressed like back in the day you expect a pimp to look. He could have been just a fashion thing, that's the way he wanted to dress. I don't know if he actually had a bevy of buxom broads at his fingertips. You know what I mean? I don't know if he had a stable of foxy ladies.
Well, he had
he just liked that look.
G-Ride, the pimp caddy.
He had a pink Cadillac, and yeah, he certainly looked the part of a pimp. But I think that was the fashion back then in the late 70s anyway. So the guy in the back starts using the N-word, the guy in the back seat. He's saying really racist, making racist kind of comments. And I'm thinking, this is the wrong guy to do that to. But the guy who's driving, the African-American guy who picked us up, is actually being friendly to that guy and kind of off-putting to me. And I didn't understand that. And I asked him directly, and he told me, well, he knows where I stand. I know where he stands. We're both from the South. We're both from this area. And I was like, wow. So that kind of blew my mind a little bit, because I grew up in an area that, we had all different ethnicities and everybody got along. There wasn't any kind of racial conflict or anything close like they had in the South.
Now, were they speaking, both the black guy and the white guy, were they speaking with heavy Southern accents?
Pretty much, kind of. Yeah, with heavy accents. And mostly to each other and kind of ignoring me. When I would try to chime in with something, I would kind of get the cold shoulder a little bit. And in fact, Fraser, the town where the murderer on acid was going to, it was closer than Millington, where I was going. It was another 10 minutes. Millington was another 10 minutes down the road past Fraser. And he dropped that guy off right exactly where he wanted to go. And for me, he's like, you can get out and find your way from here. It's kind of shocking, and it was dark. And by that time, when we're in Memphis, I should mention, the sun was just starting to set. So it was getting noisier, louder, darker. You felt a little bit more of an increasing sense of danger. But once we got in the car, then we were driving as the sun was really going down and it was getting dark. And so he dropped the murderer on acid off exactly at his house, went out of his way and dropped him off. The guy that had, said things that would never come out of my mouth, that I thought were, politically incorrect or racist or whatever. But apparently, I don't know, it was acceptable to them between the two of them. They understood each other. I don't know. But me, he was like, all right, see you later. Good luck. And I walked and I just kept walking. And it was maybe a couple miles. It was enough to get, my feet sore a little bit from walking, carrying a heavy sea bag. And I came across a liquor store that had a phone. And I dialed the main office at a Navy dormitory is usually called the quarterdeck, just like on a ship, we call it a quarterdeck. So I called the quarterdeck to the school, and I still remember the guy that answered and everything. He's like, all right, you're close enough. You're outside of Memphis. We can get a van to you. And they sent a van to me and picked me up and threw my sea bag in the van. And I ended up at the air traffic control school. And I made it. I was successful. I got it. I got there. Later on, the Navy organized groups, the Navy firefighters and stuff, to go into Memphis and help put out the fires. And I think Master at Arms are what we call, or Shore Patrol, we call the Navy police. I think they helped out with the policing and stuff until things got settled. And I know they called out the National Guard.
Wow.
I didn't realize it at the time, but I knew I was going to do this interview. So I looked it up online and they called out the National Guard. And in the New York Times, they were quoting from 1978, they were quoting spokespeople for the fire department in Memphis and the police department in Memphis. And they were actually using those politically incorrect words like the N-word in the newspaper, in the New York Times, quoting these people, which I thought was odd too. It's just different times,
different world,
and different perceptions people have of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But even back then, to me, it was completely non-acceptable just because of the area I grew up and the manner in which I grew up. And different parts of the country are so different from each other as to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But I was shocked actually even reading that New York Times, because I didn't remember exactly the dates of when this happened, but apparently it was July, August of 1978. So I happened to peruse the article a little bit, and just reading the article was a little shocking to me.
Well, wow. Did you actually see smoke in the air and black clouds and all that?
Oh yeah, there were fires. It was typical of maybe like you would see in a movie or something, of a place that's in chaos. There was, gangs roaming the streets and people on street corners smoking marijuana and drinking tall boys, and the houses were all shut up. All people were indoors and locked, and the radio was saying things like "Don't go out unless you absolutely have to. Try to stay in your homes." And it was just a period of chaos. That San Diego is a beautiful, beautiful place. And there I was in Coronado, where millionaires live and a lot of retired Navy officers. And I fly out of there and I land into this completely unexpected situation. But it's something that when you're actually in that situation, you just deal with it. You got to find a way to get to where you're going. And that's what I did. And it all worked out. I came out unscathed, except with a crazy story that I can tell people.
No,
now.
I love that story. And it reminds me of something we were talking about the other day, and how that you've had all of these crazy experiences. And half the time people they think that your stories are exaggerated or too far-fetched. And then the other thing is that after you've gone through an experience like that, it really teaches you that you got to keep your cool and just get through things, right?
Well, I don't actually even tell this story. If you were to ask most of my friends and relatives, they don't know this story. I will sometimes, when we're talking with Navy buddies, maybe mention some of these stories, but I told you the story about the tartar sauce the other day. How irate this person was that they accidentally put tartar sauce on his salad instead of blue cheese. And how do I relate a story like I just told you to a person like that who's born and raised in the same place, lives in the same place, didn't go out and experience a lot of the world? And one of the most amazing stories they have is how in a restaurant they put tartar sauce on his salad when he had requested blue cheese. So that's why I don't tell these stories. I told you the story of the knife fight I had on a ship where I got stabbed in the hand, and some of these things I just don't tell them to people. And I do know I have Navy folks who that's all they do is tell these stories. And yes, they're wild stories about the Philippines, about Korea, about different places they've been and things that have happened. And it's just a little too much. We all have, shared experiences. People who were in the Navy in the 70s, early 80s, a lot of them have these wild experiences. If they were on ships going to different countries, you're a young person and you're out to sea for 3 weeks. So you have a paycheck and a half in your pocket and you're pulling into, let's say, Hong Kong for 4 days. You've got 45 days worth of salary in your pocket. When you're on a ship, there's nothing to spend it on other than what? Soap? If your washcloth gets old and you buy a new washcloth, what are you going to spend your money on? And then you pull into Hong Kong, you're like a millionaire who's on vacation because you can stay in a nice hotel, you can eat great food, you can go out and have a few drinks and do these things that you normally wouldn't do if you were if you were a civilian, you were not in the Navy, and you'd have to save up your money for a long time. Then the airline ticket would cost you a bunch of money and you got to pay for it. So you're a little bit careful. Well, you walk into the street in Hong Kong or Korea or the Philippines with reckless abandon. You've got your buddies with you. You've all have got what seems to you unlimited funds. You're not going to run out of money in 4 days, no matter how wild you get. And then you're just going to go right back to the ship after those 4 days where your food is free, your lodging is free, and you're still getting a paycheck. So knowing those situations, of course you're going to have wild stories.
A lot of adventure and trouble that you can get into. You should be a recruiter. You're pitching it pretty well. It sounds like a good time.
No, because that was the 70s and the 80s. I did pitch that to my son, and he joined the Navy, and he did one tour and got out. He stayed at the same duty station. They had all this training he had to do, and they didn't even have the computers for him to do the training. So he had to go through all these qualifications before they would let him on a ship. And if you have certain allergies, they won't let you go out to sea. And everything is a lot of administrative paperwork now. And it's just not like it used to be. I'm sure there are pockets of folks, Navy SEALs and people that are in direct support and things like that who have to take off at a moment's notice that have some interesting stories, but it didn't work that way for my son. And I couldn't sell the Navy that way today because it's a different Navy.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Streetwise English podcast, where we have conversations and interviews with our American friends. We hope you enjoyed it, and you can learn more about our podcast at streetwisenglish.com and more about the guest that we just featured, Dagwood Streets, on his podcast called the Electric Scooter Podcast on all major podcast platforms. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Oh, and next time we're going to have an interview with Dagwood Streets about his knife fight in the Navy. So that's going to be a good one. That will be episode 6. So join us soon. Thanks a lot. Peace.